Before we begin, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you're sitting right now. I want to know who's listening. From Tallahassee to Tacoma, from a kitchen table in Ohio to a porch swing in Georgia. Now, let me tell you about the Sunday brunch that almost cost my daughter everything she owned, and the 6 words she texted me under the table that changed the whole afternoon. She walked into my restaurant wearing a cream silk blouse and a smile she'd clearly practiced in the mirror. The mother of the man my daughter wanted to marry, Diane Whitfield, 62 years old, hair lacquered into a helmet of platinum waves, 3 rings on her right hand alone, each one large enough to anchor a small boat. She air-kissed my daughter on both cheeks like they were old friends, though they'd met exactly twice. She extended a hand to me with the wrist limp, palm down, the way certain women do when they expect a kiss instead of a shake. I shook it, firm, American. She blinked once, recalibrated, and her smile widened. "Mr. Calloway, what a delight. Emma has told me so much about you." She had not. My daughter Emma had told me almost nothing about Diane, which I now understood was a kind of warning in itself. Emma is 28, a pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai down in Miami, the kind of girl who still calls me every Sunday night without being asked. She's smart, she's grounded, she lost her mother to ovarian cancer when she was 19, and the 2 of us have been a team ever since. Her fiancé Brandon was sitting across from Diane, fidgeting with his napkin, looking like a man who already regretted whatever was about to happen. I own the place we were eating in, the Coastal Pearl, a steak and seafood house in Coral Gables I'd built from one rented storefront in 1991 into a small chain of 4 restaurants across South Florida. I'd offered to host the brunch because Emma asked me to, and because I wanted to size up the family my only child was about to marry into. I'd reserved the private dining room at the back, the one with the bay windows and the slow ceiling fans, and I'd told the kitchen to send out the good stuff: stone crab claws, eggs Benedict with house-cured gravlax, a bottle of champagne I'd been saving for something worth celebrating. I was about to find out this wasn't it. Diane arranged herself at the table the way a cat settles into a sunny spot. Slow, deliberate, claiming territory. Her husband, Brandon's stepfather, a man named Roger with a salesman's tan and watery eyes, took the seat beside her. Brandon sat across from his mother. Emma sat next to Brandon, and I took the head of the table. The waiter, Marcus, who'd worked for me 11 years, poured the champagne with a face that betrayed nothing. He's seen enough of these family meetings to know when something's off. He glanced at me as he stepped back. I gave him the smallest nod. "Stay nearby." "To the future," Diane said, lifting her flute. "To family, to union," we clinked. I sipped. The champagne was excellent. Diane drank like she was thirsty. Roger drank like he was nervous. Brandon barely wet his lips. Emma smiled at me across the table, and there was something tight around her eyes I didn't like. For the first 20 minutes, it was small talk. Diane told me about her family in Connecticut, the Whitfields, who apparently had been people of consequence since before the Revolution. She mentioned Greenwich. She mentioned Yale, although it took me a few minutes to realize she wasn't claiming she'd gone there, only that her late father had attended. She mentioned her cousin who sat on a museum board in Manhattan. None of these names meant anything to me, and I think that bothered her more than she let on. I run restaurants. I've shaken hands with 2 presidents and 3 quarterbacks, and I've never once thought to bring it up at brunch. Then she set down her fork, dabbed her mouth with the linen napkin, and said the words I'll remember until they bury me. "Now, Mr. Calloway, Henry, may I call you Henry? Henry, I think it's time we talked about the wedding." "I figured we'd get there," I said. Emma mentioned the kids were thinking next spring. "Spring is fine," Diane said. "But I do want to be very clear about expectations. The Whitfield family has certain traditions when it comes to weddings. My own wedding was at the Greenwich Country Club. 400 guests, a string quartet from the New York Phil. Brandon is my only son. I will not have him married in a backyard with paper lanterns. Do you understand me?" I understood her fine. I just didn't see what it had to do with me. "Of course," I said carefully. "Whatever Emma and Brandon want. Their wedding, their day. Diane laughed, a real laugh like she found me genuinely amusing. Roger smiled into his champagne. Brandon went very still. Henry, that's sweet, but the children don't know what they want. The children need guidance. I've already drawn up a budget. Top-tier venue, the Vizcaya Gardens. Naturally, 350 guests. A custom Vera Wang for Emma. A tasting menu by a James Beard chef I've been corresponding with. Fireworks over the bay. A chamber orchestra. Floral installations by a designer out of Palm Beach who did my niece's wedding last fall. Welcome bags at the Ritz for out-of-town guests. 2 nights of pre-events. The whole production. That sounds expensive, I said. It is expensive. The full budget is $1.5 million. And of course, per Whitfield tradition, the groom's family selects the venue and the vendors, but the bride's family covers 70% of the cost. So that would be... She pulled a small leather notebook from her purse, opened it like she was about to take a dinner order. $1,050,000 from you, Henry. We'd want the first installment within 30 days, naturally. Vendors require deposits. I set down my fork. I want you to understand the silence that followed. The ceiling fans turned. Outside the bay window, a gull cried. Marcus, my waiter, had been refilling water glasses 2 tables over, and he froze mid-pour. Emma's face had gone the color of skim milk. Brandon was looking at his mother like he'd never seen her before. I am 67 years old. I have been at tables where men tried to buy my restaurants out from under me. I've been at tables where my own brother tried to talk me into a real estate scheme that smelled wrong, and I walked away before I lost a dime. I've been at the table when the doctor told my wife the tumor was inoperable. I know how to keep my face still, so I kept it still. Diane, I said, I'm not familiar with that tradition. Where I come from, and where most folks in this country come from, the bride's family handles what they choose to handle. The groom's family handles what they choose to handle, and the couple covers the rest if they want it bigger. 70% from the bride's father is not American tradition. That's not even Connecticut tradition. That's something you made up at this table. Diane's smile didn't move, but her eyes did. They flickered toward Roger just for a second, and Roger gave the tiniest nod like a coach to a player. I caught it. I filed it away. Henry, Diane said, her voice softer now, almost wounded. I understand if this feels like a lot, but Brandon is marrying up. Please don't take offense. That's just a turn of phrase, and the Whitfield name carries certain expectations. There will be people at this wedding whose opinions matter. There will be press. My cousin in Greenwich already called the society editor at, There won't be press at my daughter's wedding, I said. Not unless Emma wants press, which I doubt because she's a nurse and she likes her privacy. Diane's nostrils flared. Roger leaned forward and put a hand on her arm, and I watched her swallow whatever she was about to say. That's when I felt it. A foot under the table. Emma's foot. Tap, tap, tap and against my ankle. Hard enough to mean something. Then her hand, sliding down by her thigh, came up over the edge of the table holding her phone. Screen tipped toward me. She typed a message in her notes app and held it where only I could see. 6 words. Dad, he's not the groom. She is. I read it twice. I made my face do nothing. Then I looked at Brandon, really looked at him. The way he was holding his napkin. The way his eyes kept darting toward his mother and away. The way he hadn't said a single word in defense of this insane budget. Hadn't laughed, hadn't disagreed, hadn't even looked surprised. He looked like a hostage. Emma slipped the phone back into her lap. Her hand was shaking. I lifted my champagne. I took a slow sip. I set the glass down and I smiled at Diane Whitfield the way I smile at vendors who try to overcharge me on prawns. Diane, I said, Roger, let me think on it. Right now, let's enjoy this beautiful brunch my kitchen has prepared. We can talk numbers another day. 2 words, really. Let me think. Let me look. Let me find out exactly who you are. Diane took it as a yes. I watched the relief wash through her shoulders, watched Roger's hand slide off her arm, watched her reach for her champagne with a renewed appetite. She launched into a story about her late father's yacht. I nodded in the right places. I asked Roger what he did for a living. Consulting. Mostly between ventures, was his answer, which told me everything, and I watched Brandon push food around his plate. When the brunch ended, an hour later, Diane hugged Emma like a daughter and told me she'd email the vendor list by Tuesday. Roger pumped my hand. Brandon held on to my hand a bit too long and said very quietly, "Mr. Calloway, thank you for hosting." His eyes were red. I walked them to the door. I waved as their rental Mercedes pulled out of the lot. Then I turned to Marcus and I said, "Get me Joe Russo on the phone. Tell him it's Henry and tell him it's important." Joe Russo is a private investigator in Coconut Grove. He's a retired Miami-Dade detective with 30 years on the homicide squad. He helped me out 15 years ago when a former employee tried to embezzle from the Coastal Pearl, and we've been friends ever since. He doesn't take just anybody as a client. He took my call. "Henry," he said, "what kind of trouble?" "The kind that just tried to bill me $1 million over Eggs Benedict." I'm intrigued. Names: Diane Whitfield, mid-60s, claims Greenwich, Connecticut originally. Husband Roger Whitfield says he's a consultant. Looks like a guy who's been told no a lot recently. And the son, Brandon Whitfield, 29, engaged to my daughter. I want to know who they really are. I want it inside a week. Done. Anything else? Yeah, I said. Look at the son separately. I think he's the only honest one in the bunch. I drove Emma home that afternoon. Brandon had ridden with his parents. As soon as the car door closed, Emma broke. The whole story came out in a rush. She had met Brandon 10 months ago at a hospital fundraiser. He worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveled a lot. Sweet, funny, attentive. She'd fallen hard. She'd met Diane and Roger only twice. Both times Diane had dominated the conversation. Roger had laughed at her jokes and Brandon had barely spoken. 3 weeks ago, Brandon had sat Emma down and told her he needed to tell her something. He told her his mother and stepfather had a problem. They'd been running a kind of scheme for years, moving from city to city, befriending wealthy families through their children's romances, then squeezing the families for money. Wedding deposits, investment opportunities, loans for sick relatives that didn't exist. They'd done it in Charlotte. They'd done it in Atlanta. They'd done it in Naples. They'd burned through whatever inheritance Diane had actually had, and now they lived on what they could extract. Brandon had figured it out 3 years ago. He'd refused to play along. They'd lived apart for 2 years. Then 6 months ago, Roger had shown up at Brandon's apartment in tears. Said his mother was sick, said they were broke, said, "Please, just one more time." Brandon, who is a kind person and a foolish person, had agreed. He thought he could fake it for a few months, then cut his parents loose after the wedding. But then he met Emma and he fell in love. And he realized he was about to let his mother bleed the family of the woman he loved for over $1 million. He'd been trying to find the right moment to confess to Emma. He hadn't found it yet when Diane sprung the budget at brunch. "I should have warned you, Dad," Emma said. She was crying. "I'm so stupid. You didn't know the whole story," I said. "You know it now. We handle it now. Together." That night I sat on my back porch with a glass of bourbon and I thought about my late wife. Linda had a saying, "People show you who they are at the table. Watch the table." I watched the table that day, and I'd seen it clear as crystal. Joe Russo called me back in 5 days. He came over to the house with a folder. "Henry," he said, "buckle in." Diane Whitfield was not Diane Whitfield. Her birth name was Diane Marie Lorella. She'd been reinventing herself for decades. Roger had 2 prior arrests for wire fraud. They'd targeted multiple families before. Brandon was clean. He was a victim. The next morning, I called Brandon. I asked him to come to my restaurant alone. He showed up looking like he hadn't slept. I sat him down in my office, closed the door, poured him a coffee, and told him what I knew. All of it. He cried. A grown man in my office crying like a kid. He apologized so many times I lost count. "Brandon," I said, "stop apologizing and start helping. Are you willing to wear a wire?" He looked up. He wiped his face. He nodded. "Then here's what we're going to do." Over the next 3 weeks, with the FBI coordinating, we built the case. Diane and Roger talked. They handed over documents. They demanded deposits. They told us everything because they thought they'd won. They were arrested on a Thursday morning. Diane in a robe and curlers, Roger in golf pants. Clean arrest. No drama. Brandon was at my house when it happened, sitting at my kitchen table with Emma holding his hand. The trial took 11 months. I sat in the gallery for every day of it. So did Emma. So did Brandon, who testified against his own mother and stepfather. Diane was convicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 14 years. Roger got 11 years. Emma and Brandon got married 8 months after the verdict. The ceremony was in my backyard under the live oaks with 63 guests, paper lanterns, and a barbecue from the smoker I'd built myself. Emma wore a dress that cost $420 off the rack. Brandon wore his real father's old suit. He calls me Pop now. Not because I asked him to, but because he wanted to. I think about that brunch sometimes. The cream silk blouse. The practiced smile. The leather notebook. How close my daughter came to spending the next decade being slowly emptied out by a woman who saw her as a wallet with legs. People underestimate 67-year-old fathers. They think we're tired. They think we've gone soft. They think we'll write the check to keep the peace. That's their mistake. If you've made it this far, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you've ever sat at a table with somebody who showed you who they really were, and you listened, drop your story in the comments. I read every one. We learn from each other here.